Here we'll draw the ascending spinal cord pathways, which carry sensory information from the body. Sensory afferents from the face travel via the trigeminal sensory system, which is discussed elsewhere. First, start a table for the key ascending pathways. Denote that they are the posterior column pathway and the anterolateral system, which is often referred to simply as the spinal thalamic tract, and the spinocerebellar pathways. Now let's draw an axial cross-section of these pathways. Draw an outline of the spinal cord. Next, draw the butterfly wing-shaped gray matter horns. Then draw the bilateral posterior columns. Begin a table for the sensory modalities of the ascending pathways. Label the header pathway, fiber size, function, and course. We'll see how fiber size and function are related. Indicate that the posterior column pathway comprises large sensory fibers that carry proprioceptive sensation, our sense of position, which includes vibration, two-point discrimination, and joint position information. Next, indicate that posterior column fibers ascend the spinal cord ipsilateral to their side of origin. They do not cross to the opposite side. Then indicate that a division occurs at thoracic level 6, T6. Show that the cuneate fasciculus carries sensory information from the upper body, from T6 and above, for instance the arms. Then indicate that the gracile fasciculus carries sensory information from the lower body, from below T6, for instance the legs. As a mnemonic, for the gracile fasciculus, draw a ballerina. Ballerinas need graceful legs, which helps associate gracile with legs. Now show that the anterolateral system, the spinothalamic tract, lies just outside of the anterior gray matter horn and the anterolateral region of the white matter of the spinal cord. Indicate in our table that the anterolateral system comprises small fiber sensation pathways that carry pain, temperature, and itch sensory information. It carries what's bothersome or painful. Although the anterolateral system most notably includes the spinothalamic tract and is thus sometimes considered synonymous to the spinothalamic tract, it doesn't just synapse in the thalamus, but also in the hypothalamus and brainstem, which is why we refer to it as the anterolateral system. Next, indicate that anterolateral system fibers ascend the spinal cord contralateral to their side of origin. They cross to the opposite side, unlike the posterior column pathway. Now show that its somatotopic organization is such that the arm fibers lie on the inside and the leg fibers lie on the outside. As a mnemonic, let's learn the clinical correlation of a cervical syringomelia. Draw an outline of the cervical spinal cord. Then draw the gray matter horns. Next, demarcate the anterolateral system in the anterolateral spinal cord. Then show its fibers cross the ventral commissure. Now show a fluid-filled cavity, a syrinx, expand outward and encroach upon the anterolateral system to show that it affects the inner, the arm fibers, prior to the outer, the leg fibers. And it also affects the crossing fibers at that level. To understand the clinical exam findings of a cervical syringomelia, draw a person with a suspended sensory level wherein small fiber sensation is lost in a cape-like distribution in the arms and upper trunk, but sensation is preserved in the legs. Next, let's transition to a separate organizational principle of the anterolateral system. As a division functional correlate, generally the lateral regions of the anterolateral system subserve pain and temperature, and the anterior regions subserve tactile and pressure sensation. Lastly, along the lateral wall of the spinal cord, draw the spinocerebellar tracts. Indicate that they divide into posterior spinocerebellar tracts and anterior spinocerebellar tracts. Write that the spinocerebellar tracts comprise large sensory fibers that carry joint proprioception to the cerebellum for coordination. Now that we've learned the anatomy of these systems, let's draw out their pathways. First, show that the cell bodies for spinal sensory fibers lie within the dorsal root ganglia. Show that they contain a single short axon that emanates from the cell body. Indicate that it passes peripherally to join the motor root and centrally toward the spinal cord. Thus, the spinal sensory axons are pseudo-unipolar. Next, draw Lissauer's tract along the dorsal edge of the dorsal horn, which is the entry zone for the anterolateral system fibers. Then label the ventral commissure between the anterior horns of the spinal cord, which is where the anterolateral system fibers cross midline. With those regions in place, show that the central processes of the anterolateral system pass through Lissauer's tract and synapse within the ipsilateral dorsal horn. Then show that they cross within the ventral commissure to ascend the spinal cord, contralateral to their site of origin. Now we're ready for the posterior column pathway. Indicate that the posterior column pathway fibers directly ascend the spinal cord within the ipsilateral posterior column. Thus, they don't make a synapse within the spinal cord. Finally, let's introduce some important posterior column demarcation lines. Show that the posterior median septum separates the bilateral sides of the posterior columns. Then show that the posterior intermediate septum separates ipsilateral fasciculi. This concludes our diagram.